WFAS 1230.
Coach Tony.
Oh yeah, the new stinger got put in. Hey, for those of you who are wondering what the hell that just was, that's the new stinger, and I dig it. By the way, if you want that, you can get that as a ringtone if you like. Go to www.heycoachtony.com, and you can click the link to to ringtones, and you can get on that. Now, listen, there's more to do, but I want to start getting to some of these calls. In fact, we are going to go to our good buddy Steve, who's calling in from Dobbs Ferry. Steve, you're on Let Them Play.
Anthony, how are you today?
I'm doing great, man. What's going on?
First of all, I love the Kevin Jordan story. That is just totally selfless. I mean, that has nothing to do with sports or baseball. It has everything to do with life, and just a great story.
I wouldn't give one of my kids a kidney, much less one of my players.
Tony, I know, and I played with a guy when I was younger, but he actually gave his kid a kidney when the kid was like a year old, and it shrinks up and then grows out again. It's amazing.
Well, again, it's an amazing story, and I obviously joke around. I would give at least 2 of my 3 kids. I'd give a kidney to. So listen, we're talking about playing up.
You know, that's always a difficult topic, but I think I'm kind of a fan of it for a couple of reasons. Number one, in my own town in Little League, there are some children at the 12-year-old level that literally have outgrown and outskilled the 12-year-old Little League field. In other words, they can become almost a danger to the other players because they are so big, so strong, and so skilled at hitting. So I kind of am a fan of it. I'm not even sure of your thoughts, but I think it's something that should actually be seriously considered when a child is that good.
Well, I got to tell you, this is one of the few instances in youth sports where there's a very sports-specific aspect to this. You're talking about baseball, and a lot of people don't realize that between the ages of 12 and 13, a kid goes from a field that has a 46-foot mound and 60-foot bases to the next year a 60-foot mound and 90-foot bases. The same field that A-Rod and Derek Jeter play on. So for baseball, and at that age, I think it's an interesting topic, and it's one that's completely separate. Now, there has been a development since we were kids that there's a new field for 12-year-olds, even some 11-year-olds, that has a 50-foot mound and 70 or 75-foot bases, so it's kind of a little step in between. So when it comes to issues of safety, I totally agree with you, but a lot more of what I'm talking about are the parents, and it tends to be driven by the parents, who seemingly say, I want my kid to be challenged more. Forget about safety issues for a second, Steve, and look at it through those eyes. When a kid is kind of pushed by the parent to say, this isn't good enough for us, we got to play up, and it starts, like you said, starts as early as embryo soccer when these 6-year-old kids are running around and they're not, quote, challenged enough. What are the ups and downs of that? Take away the safety factor and the baseball factor.
I think you need to certainly, it can't be a parental decision alone. It's got to be a coach's decision as well. I mean, again, as a coach at the 12-year-old level last year, there were some 10-year-olds that I think should have been on my team because they were that good. And when we went to Cooperstown, they could have helped us in Cooperstown. So it's a decision that needs to be made, again, with the coaches as well as the parents. And if all are on board, regardless of the sport, it might benefit everybody.
Well, you know what, I think hopefully throughout the course of the show, and we're going to continue to take your calls at 914-693-5700, but I think one of the things I want to try to identify today are some of these moving parts. You talk about the skill level of the kid. There are some real subtleties that I'm going to get into in just a second that really outline further some of the different moving parts in this equation. So I'm hoping that people will be calling in to give us some of those different aspects. And Steve, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. That's a great call. And I think Steve has a couple of neat ideas around that. There are kids who can certainly benefit from some competition. But, again, there are other pieces here. Parents, coaches' decisions. We didn't talk much about the kids' decision themselves. So, again, we'll be taking your calls at 914-693-5700. But you know what? Before we get back to your calls, there was one other thing I wanted to address, and I think it's worth addressing. I got an email during the course of the week, and it came in from our buddy Mike in Franklin Square, who wrote in and said, "Hey, Coach Tony, I think you were being way too hard on the moms from Wyoming this past week. I personally love it when you get into it with someone on the phone, but last week it seemed like you went on the attack and unloaded on these moms. It's really no wonder none of them called your show. It seems like you didn't give them a chance." Normally, I would bury Mike from Franklin Square, but I got to tell you, Mike, first, thanks for listening in. More importantly, thanks for the feedback, because in a way, you are right. I absolutely did unload on those moms. Now, for those of you who weren't listening last week, well, first of all, shame on you. But secondly, we did a story about a group of moms who took offense to the fact that a reporter went to their gymnastics gym to do a story about a team of gymnasts, but when he got there, he watched a little girl who was in the midst of overcoming some, internal pitfalls and decided to change his story completely. Well, these moms went ballistic, and they started attacking this little girl and her mother, who also happens to be the coach at the gym. I'm not going to relive this whole thing. If you're interested, you can go to the blog or go on YouTube and check it out for yourself. The blog, by the way, www.heycoachtony.com. Anyway, back to Mike's concern. I unloaded on these moms, Mike, because I had gotten a heads up right before the show that none of those moms were going to be calling in to defend their moronic positions. All right? I was ticked off enough because of the story, but when I learned that none of these cackling disgraces had enough backbone to call in and stand behind what they had just typed on some blog, that's when I just lost it. Because even though they weren't calling, I know that small community in Wyoming was listening. So I was going to get my pound of flesh. So, Mike, if you listen to the show, and apparently you do, you know I always give somebody the opportunity to defend their position, no matter how big a mongo they might be. In this case, they were cowards as well, and so I let them have it. It was just a small gesture on my part of defense for that little girl and for her mom. Now, all right, now that I got that off my chest, we can get back to the show. I was up on checkswing.com again this week. By the way, if you're a baseball guy and you haven't gone to checkswing.com, go check it out. It is really the most comprehensive website for parents and coaches of young baseball players. So if you're a baseball guy, you got to go there. Anyway, the topic of kids playing up was tossed around a bit, and there were some really good points going back and forth. Whether or not a kid should play up has been one of the most heated debates in all of youth sports, and for a very long time. So I wanted to address it this week and see what you all have to say. Fact is, there are some good arguments on both sides of this, so I don't know if we're going to necessarily solve this one today, but I want to hear not only what your position is, but why you take that position, and more importantly, some of the factors that go into this decision. Let's face it, all kids are different, and there are going to be different reasons for whether or not a kid should play up. So again, we're going to open up the studio lines for you at 914-693-5700. But I do want to, there was a couple of emails that came in that I want to address as well. In fact, a simple one came in from Dave, who says, "Hey, Coach Tony, the player may be physically able to play up, but mentally, are they prepared? I found there was a big gap in maturity in any single year in the development of a kid, and that could work either way for them." And that's a good point, Dave, and thanks for writing in. The whole idea behind when a kid matures physically and mentally, first of all, it rarely happens in the same year. I know kids that are 18 years old that still haven't mentally matured. But when we're talking about mental maturation, we're talking about whether or not a kid can go from being the best kid on the team, or even the best kid in the league, to then moving up and getting his little mental arms around, I'm just good now. I'm not a standout. Or guess what? Maybe I can't handle the pressure. And so I really, I regress and I become a bench warmer. That's a serious factor to consider. And Dave, I think you bring up a good topic, and I'm sure we'll have some folks chiming in on that. We got another one in from Mike, who says, and this is not Mike from Franklin Square, Mike says, "I think that it's more important to play with the players that are your age. The times I've seen players playing up, they usually get stuck with less playing time than when they play with, when they play with the older players, as opposed to playing different positions or getting more time in their own age group. Another factor here is that too many parents think their kids are better than they really are. Unless the player is objectively head and shoulders above everyone else in his age group, he'll get more than enough opposition in his age group. Sports is not just about improving athletic ability, but growing up as a person. It's more important to learn to interact with others your age than whether or not you can perform against better competition. I've coached boys who played up age-wise on AAU teams. At the same time, they were playing in the, quote, in-house league in their own age. And from what I saw, not only did they have a better time in-house, they developed more both as players and as people. There are more ways to challenge a good player on the upper end of his peers than a player at the bottom of the pack. As they grow older and things get more competitive, it only intensifies in this regard. Mike, a couple of good points there. And you know what? I think that a lot of what this is boiling down to is a lot of this has to do with the specifics of the individual kid. So this is really not much more than parenting 101. It really isn't necessarily a sports issue. You know, you've got to look at a lot of different moving parts when you're making any decisions on behalf of your kid. And, you know, you start talking about some of the mental capacities, and I think Mike brings up a very good point. You know, you can, you know, and I'm going to leave some of the things I want to say till later in hopes that some of you folks kind of lead me into it, because there are a couple of things here that I want to really address, but I'm certainly going to give our callers a chance to do that first. So before I get back to the emails, I think we're going to go back to get some more callers. You know what? Yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that? Why don't we go with we got Ian who is calling in. This is Ian who's calling in from Wyoming. Is this Ian from Wyoming?
Yes, it would be, Tony.
Yeah, this is Ian St. Clair, the gentleman who wrote the terrific article that we highlighted last week. Ian, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. I figured since I'm listening and you got that email, I figured it was a good time to call in and share my 2 cents with you about this whole topic of playing up.
Great. Well, what do you think about kids that are playing up?
Obviously, from my experience with the gymnast who was playing up with kids and parents who didn't feel like she should have been doing it, my experience has been somewhat negative towards it, because like you keep bringing up about the parents, they have these, like you say on your blog, rose-colored glasses about what they think of their kid and the ability that they have. And whatever the sport, but especially baseball, they think their kid is going to be the next Cy Young winner or MVP, and whatever the coach says, they don't necessarily agree with it. And they'll do whatever they can to prove that their kid is worthy of playing up.
Well, that's a great point, and that goes back to some of that objectivity, where mom and dad will clearly say that this kid's ready to play up. They don't have enough of an understanding of just how good or how bad their kid really is, and that's when I think you run into problems, when the parents are the ones that are driving that decision because they want what's best, well, quote, what's best for their kid, when in reality there's some need that they're filling on their own. I got to tell you, my general opinion is the negative far outweighs the positive of a kid playing up, and barring unique circumstances, I got to tell you, I'm not a big proponent of it. And when we come back from break, I'm going to explain to you why. I'm going to take some more of your calls at 914-693-5700. And apparently, we're going to be getting a flash update from the soccer games when we come back as well. But before we do go to break, folks, if you haven't checked out the new website, I'm telling you, go to www.heycoachtony.com, because we've recently added a whole bunch of new stuff. You may have heard, like I said, we got the ringtones up there. You can follow me on Twitter. You can listen live to the show. I started putting up some of my favorite video clips from the shows, from the past shows. You can buy my book. A whole bunch of new stuff happening. So please go check out www.heycoachtony.com and let me know what you think. Stick around, folks. We'll be right back.